I'm going to go ahead and call to order the Committee of the Whole meeting on this November 8th, 2021. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We have an important topic, a project that's gone through many phases, and we're about to start another one tonight, I think. The Rainier Avenue South and Rainier Avenue North corridor improvements, Phase 4, from South 3rd Street to Northwest 3rd Place, and a condemnation ordinance. And I think to lead us in discussion, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Martin.
Good evening, Council President Corman and members of the City Council. We are here to speak with you regarding the recommendation to the City Council adoption of a proposed ordinance authorizing the start of condemnation proceedings for a portion of certain properties on Rainier Avenue South and North between South 3rd Place and Northwest 3rd Street. As you'll see in the presentation, this is a necessary step for the project should negotiations with property owners not prove successful, and to avoid a potential delay or even cancellation of the project due to funding loss. I'd like to introduce Michelle Faltos, our project manager, who will walk you through the presentation. And at the end of the presentation, Michelle and other staff are available if you have any questions. Michelle?
Good afternoon, everybody, or I should say good evening. Let me share the screen, and I'll go ahead and start my presentation. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. This is for, as Martin said earlier, for Rainier Avenue South corridor improvements, Phase 4. It's an extension of the improvements that were done on Phase 3, which is from, I believe, 167 to South 3rd or North 3rd Place. So the improvements will begin at South 3rd Street and continue just beyond the airport to North 3rd Place. And right now we have, we're in design and we're just about at 100%. So the real critical path here now is right of way and continuing the negotiations with the property owners along the corridor. Some of the project goals for Rainier Avenue is to improve transit mobility, pedestrian accessibility, and safety. It'll benefit overall traffic flow through access management, traffic signal updates, and coordination. We'll be putting in a median along the road, which will help with access management. Will improve the pedestrian environment and safety. And then improving the intersections at South 3rd Street and South 2nd Street. And this is in preparation of converting South 2nd and South 3rd to two-way traffic operations. It will also construct a segment of the Lake Washington Loop Trail from Airport Way to Northwest 3rd Place. And then it will put in 2 pedestrian activated traffic signals, hawk signals, at Southwest Victoria and Northwest 3rd Place. And then there'll be sidewalk widening. We'll be widening the sidewalks to 8 feet in most places. And then there'll also be planter strips, streetscaping, and making it overall a more vibrant corridor. So the project budget, we have a lot of funding sources and a lot of grants that are coming in for this project. There was a $2.6 million grant, a $2.6 million grant for preliminary engineering, a $3 million grant for right-of-way. We've received $4.5 million for construction, and then another $4.793 for construction, and more recently a $2 million regional mobility grant also for construction. The last bit is a $5 million TIB grant that we have requested, and we're hoping to hear back later this month with some good news. And then as far as the schedule goes, we've been at 90% design now for a little bit of time because the driving factor and the critical path has been the right-of-way acquisition. With that being said, our 100% design should be complete any moment, and then once the 100% design is completed, we'll submit to WSDOT for approval. And at the same time that we submit to WSDOT for approval for the design, with the passing of the ordinance for the condemnation, we're hoping that we'll be able to also submit for our certification. Not hoping, we need to submit for our certification in order to maintain our grant deadlines for obligation. And the plan is then to advertise in the summer of 2022, so just this next year, and then construction beginning in fall of 2022, and we're anticipating about a 2-year construction, or 2 years for construction. And again, the right-of-way acquisition is the critical path for meeting the funding obligations and beginning construction next summer. So the parcels that are impacted. So there are about 36 or 35 parcels along Rainier that will be impacted by this project. And of those 35 parcels, we're dealing with about 28 different property owners. Some property owners do own more than one parcel. And then, so what we're taking are, so the easements and acquisitions are only strip takes, which allow for the city to meet our current street design standards. And I've kind of included on the side over here what the easements or strip takes look like. So here is a piece that we'll actually be taking, a piece of right-of-way, and then this will be an easement, and then a temporary construction easement back here. So we're not taking full parcels, it's just strips and small takes in order to accommodate utility easements, slope easements, and then to be able to construct the improvements. So the city has been negotiating to acquire portions of properties for nearly a year. We've obtained 5 signed agreements and 4 verbal agreements to enter into acquisition documents. So we're making progress with negotiating with the property owners. So a little bit about the condemnation process itself. In order to meet the timeframes outlined in our grants, the city needs to acquire necessary property rights by March of 2022. If we don't meet the deadlines, the city is at risk of losing millions of dollars in grants for this project. The proposed ordinance authorizes initiation of condemnation proceedings to acquire the property rights needed for the project, which is a prerequisite for the city filing a condemnation lawsuit. It will be necessary to initiate condemnation proceedings in case continued negotiations with property owners are unsuccessful. And the main thing to reiterate here is that we are continuing to negotiate with the property owners. This doesn't in any way replace negotiating with them at this time. It is just in case we are unable to reach agreements with these property owners in order to be able to build the project. So the staff recommendation, the city will continue to negotiate with property owners in order to reach an agreement, but the initiation of condemnation is necessary to acquire the property rights as required by the grant funding for the project. And so we recommend to adopt the proposed ordinance authorizing the initiation of condemnation proceedings for a portion of certain properties on Rainier Avenue South and Rainier Avenue North between South 3rd Street and Northwest 3rd Place. And now is a good time for questions. And
Okay.
So I would exit.
Okay. I guess before I ask for questions from the council, I would like to just say that this, anytime we talk about using condemnation for any purpose, we should really, give it careful consideration. We're talking about obviously using it as a tool to take private property and make it public property, and it's not lost on me that that's serious business, and there's only certain purposes that we're allowed to do this for. For anybody that's watching this meeting tonight that's not aware of it, the city is required to, actually by the U.S. Constitution, to compensate property owners whose property we take. The state of Washington has even additional special protections for property owners that basically require that we, if we do have to exercise condemnation, we put forward funds for the property that we're taking. And if the property owner challenges the amount, they can take us to court. And if we've underestimated the amount, we have to pay them the different amount plus attorney's fees. So there's a reason that we want to make sure that we compensate people properly. It's also kind of a long process if challenged, and so that's a good reason to keep negotiating. This is phase 4 of what's been a very long process to improve Rainier Avenue. I saw the reasons for it, and I think, we had safety at the end, but really safety is a big part of it. It's also the other things we talked about, making it a better pedestrian corridor, making it more serviceable. But it is sort of a dangerous street the way it's been. We were going to do this phase years ago, but we just couldn't get all the funding together, so we had to stop short of completing this phase. And so I remember the process was long in acquiring the property for the other phases. I do believe, I know we had to implement condemnation as a tool. I think in the end, we mostly negotiated our way through it. I can't remember if we actually had to use condemnation or not. I would just like to say, I really hope we can use negotiation. I hope in most cases, the property owners will be also enjoying a benefit, a safer corridor, a more beautiful corridor fronting their businesses. But in some cases, they're going to lose parking, or it will be a detriment to maybe the configuration of their building. And in those cases, we do need to properly compensate them for that. Anyways, having said that, I'd like to just ask if council has questions. I don't know if I'll see hands raised on my iPad here, so just shout out if you do have any questions. Valerie.
Thank you. I just want to clarify, when you call it a strip take, it's really just a sliver of the property in order to, for example, widen the sidewalk or put in some kind of a planting buffer between the sidewalk and the street. It's not, we're not taking in, large chunks of property. And it's my understanding also that in some cases, it's because there's a business has a sign right where we need our sidewalk to be. Am I correct in understanding that?
yes, you are. So the permanent right-of-way acquisitions are for the widening of the sidewalk, the planter strips, in order to be able to fit our current design our current design standards in an existing roadway. The easements are more for utilities, JUT trenches, utility vaults, and things of that nature. There are no full takes. There's no full right-of-way takes. They're all portions or slivers, like you said, of land.
And also, Michelle, just add, some of these are various takes of different types. As she said, there's a permanent easement that we take. There's also temporary construction easement where we have to go out beyond that permanent easement so we have room to construct. If we're going to use their particular property while we're constructing them, they need to be compensated for that particular time that we're going to do that. So you'll see various different types of takes in there. So although when you look at the compensation that goes to them, they get it for the permanent use, they get it for the temporary use, for the period of time we're going to use it for. We recompensate them for other impacts such as signs or parking or other areas where we've taken up asphalt, those sorts of things. They're compensated at certain rates based on the appraisals that are provided by the appraiser we've hired to do the process. And then at that point, as Michelle said, it's a negotiation. We sit down with them and talk with them about the numbers, show them the number we've been providing. I know that I've sent out, Michelle, how many, about 35 letters to 27 different property owners indicating what our particular needs are and what our particular price we're paying for them, or offer to pay for them for, and along with the appraisal we received, and then that information is given to them, and then we start the process of negotiations. And so it's a very regimented, as Council President Corman said, very regimented process that's laid out for us to do this. The thing is that any property that we do take, either from a temporary basis or permanent basis, is compensated for in accordance with law, federal and state law. So, the word take is kind of a misnomer. It sounds like we're going to take it without giving. They're certainly compensated at fair market value as well. And so that's always the question part of what the fair market value is. And that's why there are professional appraisers involved in this whole process. And I can't forget my friends, the city attorneys, and their associates as well, who are also involved in this process.
Yes, Councilmember Benedetti.
Thank you. I see that Cheryl raised her hand as well. So Cheryl, was this in response to what Martin was just responding to? Should I let you go first?
Well, thank you. What I was going to point out was, if you'll notice, the ordinance is like 53 pages. The actual text of the ordinance itself is very small. The attachments to it include a copy of each one of the right-of-way acquisition conveyance documents that we're seeking. And attached to each of those is a little picture or depiction of the particular easement or statutory warranty deed, the strip, or the temporary construction easement that the city's looking to take. So that if you flip through that, you'll get a really good idea of what the city is actually looking at on each of the properties. Thank you.
So Cheryl, for those of us who are not in this room right now and would not necessarily be interested in going through the 353 pages, high-level summary, is anybody going to lose a corner of their building?
Michelle, there's no buildings, there's no impact to structures. It's only relating mostly to driveways, some parking lots, and some signage.
Okay.
Michelle, that's right? I want to make sure.
Yes, Cheryl, you've got it.
Thank you.
Maybe a little fencing as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've been at this a year. My question to follow up is what are we hearing is the hesitation here from these businesses?
I would say with some of the businesses, there's been a little bit of hesitation with the appraisal, the cost per square foot. And then some of it has been the logistics, their signs, whether we'll, allow them to keep their existing business signs. Would we move it for them? I would say it's more logistical negotiations that are happening right now.
And also, Michelle, in some of it, there's corporations we have to deal with, people out of state, and so it's working our way through these corporate, property managers or whoever in charge of the real estate for that particular corporation, and also sometimes getting through those chains has been a little more difficult. than the folks who are living here in town.
And also that we're in the middle of the pandemic still, so that through a large part of this, so that usually right-of-way acquisition teams will go out to visit property owners in person, and they may be doing some of that, but the pandemic has slowed that process down. I'm sure y'all can appreciate that.
Ryan, did you raise your hand?
I did. Thank you, Mr. President. My question is very similar to Councilmember Benedetti's question with respect to the observation of it being a year of negotiations and what we think will come from that. I mean, certainly this is another point of leverage, I say, to move those negotiations along, I would say. But obviously, seeing 5 signed out of 35 isn't a great stat line. My question, I guess, would be more along the history. This is phase 4 of the project, so phases 1, 2, and 3 obviously have been moving this direction. These property owners certainly knew this was coming at this point. Did we experience a similar course of events? And maybe this is a good question for our council president, because I wasn't here when we did the previous phases, or at least wasn't on the council, and would be curious to know if it had kind of a similar run of course to how we got there, if this is fairly normal.
Yeah, I'll give the quick answer and then turn to staff. I believe that this is very similar. That and as we've talked about the logistics, I remember that pings my memory that the same thing came up. How am I going to move my sign? How am I going to move my drive-through? And these types of things. And it did take. We had to take those issues very seriously, and then we had to negotiate how those costs would be, shared or really, when it comes down to it. And I'll ask staff to correct me if I'm mistaken, but if for some reason we just couldn't get there on negotiations and we exercised condemnation and they thought we didn't pay them enough, it ultimately would go to a jury, and the jury would take into consideration if somebody had a big old sign in a location and we took that property and we just offered them a per square foot price and didn't take into account that they had to move a giant sign, the jury would say, no, we under compensated because they lost something significant. Particularly if it gets even more complicated if it's something that by code, requires variances or something like that. So those types of issues actually came up, and I thought the last time around there may have been one business where they just said that the drive-through wasn't going to work anymore, and we maybe just agreed to buy out the whole business. I can't remember, but I do think almost all of them got negotiated at the end. Does staff recall?
I'm not sure which staff was available. I've heard the same stories that you have. Yeah, Jim was here.
Yeah, I can address some of that. What is currently the Starbucks site is where we had a lot of negotiations. I think the drive-through that you were talking about is one there, but we ended up not having to take the business. It ended up being a change of business. I'm trying to recall I think it was the old business was a Jack in the Box, if I'm not mistaken. But they were in the process of transitioning to a new business at the time, and they thought the drive-through wasn't going to work. But we ended up working it out and negotiating with them. The pole sign at that location also was a big deal because per code it was supposed to be brought to our current standards, and we negotiated that as well. And as you know, the pole sign is still there. I recall one other property owner too that was just a matter of price. Some people just really have very inflated prices that they want for property, and we need to basically justify that cost. So sometimes that's a delicate situation to work with them. And sometimes we can come up with other alternatives other than price that we can help them with their property. And as Councilmember Corman said, this is actually an improvement to their property, and sometimes we got to remind them that is the case as well. We're basically improving the assessed value of their property as well. So, but there wasn't any legal action taken on the last phase. I think we were able to negotiate it all.
Actually, Jim, the condemnation lawsuits were filed, but we had to file. but they had settled. They all settled, and that's kind of what we're hoping at this point. We're hoping that with the adoption of the ordinance, that will motivate the settlement prior to condemnation filings of the lawsuits. But if it doesn't, because we've got that right-of-way certification date coming up very quickly with our grant funds relying on it, that we would then file condemnation lawsuits and hopefully have those settled prior to the time that we would actually have to go to court on those issues and not fight in court over those issues. And Councilmember Corman, in order to, the city will be very carefully weighing the, if it does have to go to court, very carefully weighing the appraisals and the amounts offered to make sure that we're not, I believe it's a 30-day window, and if you're more than 10% under, then you pay their attorney's fees. We're going to make sure that doesn't happen to the best of our abilities. So,
yeah. Good. Thank you. Great question. Okay. Any other questions? You have Councilmember McCurvey.
Thank you. I had to follow up a question with another question. This one is unrelated, though, I'm excited to see that the Lake Washington Loop would continue on this. I've heard from a few folks the way it currently is configured and understanding it was in a phased approach, that the terminus is somewhat problematic for cyclists at Airport Way as it currently stands. Will this correct that for cyclists, or will there still be an awkward point where they would have to shift over to the other side of Rainier?
There'll be a nice transition to the multi-use trail from the cycle track that's out there right now. So yeah, it's a little bit awkward, but that'll be corrected in this next phase.
Okay. Let's see. Do we have more presentation, or was that the end?
That was all I had for that.
Okay. Okay, so is there a report from tonight's meeting?
Yes, sir. I have a copy of a report.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if you need. Well, I don't know. Is it very long? Can you read it?
I can go ahead and read it. It's not too long. The report says the Committee of the Whole recommends concurrence in the staff recommendation to adopt an ordinance authorizing the initiation of condemnation proceedings for a portion of certain properties on Rainier Avenue South and Rainier Avenue North between South 3rd Street and Northwest 3rd Place, as described in Exhibit A of the proposed ordinance. The committee further recommends that this ordinance be presented for first reading on November 8th and advanced to second reading on November 15th, 2021.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Any objections or further questions? Okay, well, Council, thank you very much. And thank you, Martin, Jim, Michelle, and everybody else that's contributed, Cheryl, tonight. Appreciate the hard work on this, and I'll be crossing my fingers that we can get there through negotiations like last time. I should add that I appreciate the public working with us on this. It sounds like the property owners have been working with us. They've got some agreements in place and other dialogue open. So thanks to the public for that, and thanks to those of you on staff. And let's see if we can get it done with as much negotiation as possible. And with that, I'll say goodbye. We'll reconvene in 32 minutes as the City Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.